Good evening, Council. I'm just going to check with our information technology to make sure that we're ready to go here this evening. Good evening, Council.
Yes, we are.
Great. Thank you and welcome to our special council meeting for Wednesday, April the 21st. If you have not as yet muted your sound equipment, I would ask that you do it at this time. And we will be live streaming this meeting, and any comments made during the meeting will be audio and video recorded and shall form part of the record, which will be retained in accordance with the town's retention bylaw. So I want to welcome staff who are here this evening and council, and we have quorum, so we will move forward. And I would ask if I could have a mover and a seconder, please, to approve the special agenda for April 21st. Moved by Councillor Ices and seconded by Councillor Waters. All those in favor? That is great. Next, I would ask if there's any disclosures of interest to be declared. Seeing none, we'll go to item 4, which is a business item. We have one item on the agenda tonight, and that is a Innterprises strategic planning session. So I believe I've introduced Hisham to you before, but only briefly in a council meeting. So this evening I would ask George Chaperoux if he would please introduce the President and CEO of Innterprises. And I don't see George on the line, so he must be having some issues, technical issues this evening. So I will introduce Hisham Omara, our President and CEO of Innterprises. Welcome, Hisham, and I would hope you just take a moment and introduce yourselves to the community and to our staff, to our council. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for giving me the time today. I greatly appreciate it. Look, I think we kind of spoke briefly the last time through a very quick introduction. I think today will be a bit more of a formal introduction. So can you guys hear me clearly? Just to kind of clarify, to make sure everybody's kind of able to. That's perfect. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. So again, as Her Worship mentioned, I am the new President and CEO of Innterprises. I've been around with you for about almost 3 months now. So coming up to my 3 months anniversary in May 1st. So it's been a very wonderful ride, actually, over the last 3 months. I'm very glad to be here, be part of the team. Prior to give a bit of context, everybody, prior to joining the One Town, One Team, I was actually part of a small startup out of Toronto that became a medium-sized company in the energy space. And previously to that, I worked internationally quite a bit within Europe and the Middle East, basically within a variety of different energy portfolios. So I'm looking forward basically to bring some of that knowledge into my new role, but also learn a lot on what Innisfil is actually able to offer and where our direction is. And I think today's meeting is supposed to help us put our foot in the right direction in that space. So I think, can we begin the meeting in earnest?
Absolutely, except I would offer my apologies for not introducing you properly, Dr. As opposed
don't worry about it. It's okay. Hisham is absolutely fine. I appreciate it. Thank you, Your Worship. So maybe we can move on to the next slide quickly. Whoever's managing the slides on their end. So I think we kind of went through a bit of the introductions at the beginning. I think the agenda today is kind of focusing a bit on what is the objective of the session, why we're doing the session in the first place, and then a bit of an overview of Innterprises' strategy and its objectives. And I'll think about the bulk of the meeting, kind of walking through that. I kind of worked in a bit of a break, but we don't have to take a break unless you actually kind of want to take a quick bio break, or at least a breather just to stand up. It's been a long day. And then the latter part of the actual session will be kind of a working session to work through some of the themes from a strategic point of view of what we're trying to achieve, and to kind of solicit feedback from yourselves as the council and the wider community as well on those themes, and then closing remarks towards the end. I'm going to pause here and see if there's any objection or amendments to this agenda anybody would like to make.
Council, any changes to the agenda? No, that's great. Thank you, Sean.
Okay, so maybe we can move on to quickly to the next slides. So what's the objective of this session. Coming into this role as a new CEO of Innterprises, Enterprise has been actually as an entity active for a long time. However, though it was being engaging in very passive income-related activities. Now, with myself coming in a full-time role, we want to operationalize the institution itself and move it ahead and allow it to grow and achieve its objectives. So part of our discussion today is to try to outline what is our objective. What are we trying to do as an entity? What is our strategy as it pertains to where we fit within the wider Innisfil family, and how we're supposed to facilitate the growth of Innisfil over the next 10 years. So it's a higher level view, not necessarily a tactical view, but more a thematic view about where we want to go both as a community and how can Enterprises as a arm's length corporation that is owned 100% by the town can facilitate that during this time period. So we're going to go through again some of our kind of value proposition. What is the value proposition of Innisfil? And ultimately, what is our vision to facilitate a growth using that value proposition? And then once we kind of walk through that, we will go through a high-level discussion on the objective and vision we've kind of set out, but ultimately try to understand from a thematic point of view, can we actually create SMART goals? So, and we'll walk through what that actually means towards the end. So in terms of the themes that we want to kind of address as a community and as an entity, what are those thematic topics? Any questions on what I've kind of articulated so far?
I see no questions.
Okay, perfect. We kind of, we're 5 minutes in, that's quite fast. So maybe we can actually finish this a lot faster than I expected. All right, so maybe we can move on to the next slide, if you don't mind. So what is our value proposition? Before we move on to the slide after this, coming into Innisfil, I've actually only visited Innisfil a couple of times prior to taking on the role. So I'm kind of looking at it to a certain degree as an outsider, but maybe that gives me a better perspective. And I think it allows me to highlight, I think, some of the key capabilities and value of the town. And what is our value proposition? Innisfil has a lot to offer. And I think that's what we want to kind of unpack and view. What is it that we're able to offer? So maybe we can move on to the next slide quickly. So Innisfil offers a wealth of infrastructure. Innisfil is very uniquely situated geographically and demographically right now. It has a number of different infrastructure and landscapes that really allows us to explore and expand the town and explore a multitude of opportunities. And that starts with green spaces, agriculture, commercial, marine, and industrial. Very few locations in Ontario, even globally, have that at its fingertips. Some will have 4 out of 5, some will have 3, some will have others in not as great of a proportion as we do. We are very uniquely situated in terms of the mixture of different infrastructure and landscapes we actually have, from green spaces to agriculture, to commercial, marine, and industrial. So I think the question that we have is how can we actually exploit this to the betterment of the citizens in town? And next slide. It's taking a bit of time to render. So layered on top of that is also a diversity of communities. So Innisfil presents a unique proposition in which it kind of amalgamates the 3 different types of communities that you see in most towns and cities, which is a rural community, urban, and ultimately suburban, and ultimately an urban center that we're going to be building through the orbit and beyond that. And you can see the little train station in the corner there in the graphic. It took me a bit of time to build these graphics, but so the idea is how, with these kind of diversity, it does present a challenge. So how do you bring about and link together these diverse communities, but at the same time be able to explore and expand on the wealth and value it provides, and the different kinds of lifestyles that offers the citizens, but as well also commercial and economic opportunities. So with that kind of level of diversity, both from a landscape point of view, but also a community point of view, and understanding that the wealth that Innisfil brings in, how can we take that and drive towards a goal that we want to achieve as a community? Next slide, sir. Thank you. And if anybody wants to kind of comment on anything I've said so far, just by all means pause me and ask. So with that kind of as a backdrop, and there's a lot that Innisfil offers, and I think everybody here on the call can speak a lot better than I can on the value that Innisfil brings beyond just what I've articulated and the greatness of the. Please, sorry.
I'm sorry, Shem. I saw Councillor Fowler had a question.
Oh, of course.
Nothing. It's just a point of clarification, if possible. When you had the chart there with the urban, the suburban, and the rural, now is that accurate based on population or land mass?
No, that was just diagrammatic. It wasn't. It was just to kind of. It's more illustrative than it's not representative of the amount. It's not a pie chart in terms of the sizes. So I appreciate that might have been misleading. No, it's just a diagrammatic representation.
Not a problem. I just want to be clear. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So any other points of clarification? Thank you for clarifying that, Councillor. If not, maybe we can move on to the. So with that big of a backdrop, what is the vision of Innterprises being a entity solely owned, but also what's kind of the vision of the town? So we've kind of put together a thought here, and I actually want to take a pause once you said it. So maybe the next slide, just of what we think the vision of the town. If you think about the next 10 years, what do we want to put as a moniker for Innisfil? So maybe just next slide. Thank you. So this is a kind of a target on our end. We want Innisfil to be positioned, in our view, as the innovation, economic, services, cultural, and transportation hub of the North. And I appreciate the word North might mean different things, so I want to drop that. But I think the idea is outside of the GTA, or even including the GTA, if we want to include that, we want Innisfil to be that hub, that area and location in which kind of holds people together. It's a center for everything outside of Toronto, from innovation to economics to services to culture and transportation. Is that an achievable goal? Is that the vision we want to actually put forward? And that's kind of the statement I want to kind of start our first kind of session of dialogue. Is that a vision that the councils and the stakeholders in the community here view what we want? Recognizing that the word North might be misleading, so just a placeholder for now. Is that a vision? Is that an acceptable vision and a view of where we want to be as a community? Should I take the silence as acceptance?
Deputy Mayor, sorry.
Thank you. Okay, I understand what you're saying about Innisfil being of the North. I think years ago I was involved with a deputation to the province where the 400 and the 401 corridor was the most busiest intersection in North America. And at that time, we were looking to build a food hub in the Innisfil area at that time. So in this little picture that we have in front of us, where the road leads, is that road leading north or south? Because it should, I would say, show that Innisfil is about, from the 401 400 corridor to Innisfil is approximately about 20 minutes. And we know that that corridor is a nightmare currently, but the 407 is also closer as a transportation hub to move stuff across. So just maybe we should focus how close we are to the 400, 401, 400, 407.
Yeah, so I think the 407, because I live near to both the intersections. So, but the 407 is about, give or take, 45 minutes from the exit of the 401 onto Innisfil Beach Road. That's how when I drive it in the morning.
You drive slower than I do.
So, according to the speed designated on the highway, so it's about that 40 minutes to 45 minutes, give or take, maybe a bit less. I take a bit of time just to get on the highway from my house. I think, and if you take the 401, is just south of that, and assuming no traffic, which is a rarity for the 401 at that intersection, it's another maybe 15 minutes, 20 minutes. So we're not that far away from that location. And I think it does place us quite strategically. If you think about all the communities north of that location, then you're looking at Barrie, everything kind of to the east of us and the west of us and north of us that need to be serviced. I would say not necessarily within their purview of what's happening in Toronto to a certain degree. So I think the vision I will kind of try to articulate is, do we want to be that kind of center for everything that's within this area? And how do we, I think the next question is, how do we become that? If that's the vision that we want to kind of put together. And the 400 is a great example, but there's other, the 407, there's a discussion about expanding the highway, even another highway 4, I think it's 413. I think that's what the name of the highway, which I think hasn't moved forward, or maybe it's been pulled, the rug has been pulled under it, but we'll have to see what that looks like. And by the way, the 427 is moving up north. So I live not far away from the extension of that. And I'm expecting that to even go even further north than that moving forward. So I think we're within a very close proximity to a lot of those things. We're not far away from Pearson International Airport, which is very well served. And the other part also is the fact that we're going to be having the GO station, which is a huge attractive point. And once traffic starts traveling a lot more frequently bi-directionally, that presents a huge opportunity for us. Any other comments or points or views on at least this statement?
What we're talking about transportation, on another important link that's going to be built over the next few years is the 404-400 link. So between Bradford and ourselves is going to be what they call the Bradford bypass, which will join the top end of the 404 with the 400 just south of us. So that'll be another really important link for us.
Yeah, so it's going to kind of go around Lake Simcoe, basically.
Just south of the lake, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's going to get, sorry, you got it.
Go ahead. My internet's slow tonight, so I apologize if I keep cutting people off. Councillor Ices?
Thank you, Your Worship. I understand that this is maybe a bit of an aspirational exercise, but I guess my comment would be that it's difficult to do everything well. So if we are aspiring to do well at managing suburbia, managing an urban population, managing a rural population, there are challenges in doing that where one sector, if we at the start try to understand what each looks like and focus on them for each of those sectors to succeed, that's a pretty tall task. When you try and do everything, sometimes you can't do everything well. So I guess the challenges with doing everything well would be my thoughts.
No, thank you, Councillor. It's well noted. I think that's part of the exercise today. It's kind of to really answer that question is, while we have ambitious dreams, I think we'll get to the discussion of the themes. What themes do we want to focus on? And that's really key. Which are the areas we want to really dedicate our efforts? And even bigger cities face this challenge. Being ambitious doesn't necessarily mean you have to be a jack of all trades. I think we want to be masters of some. And what are those some? I think that's a key question I think we're trying to drive towards today answering. Thank you for that comment. Appreciate it. And I think if there's no other comments, maybe we can move on to at least we kind of established where our vision is, the fact that we want to make Innisfil a hub. And I think maybe the question is, what are the hub for what? We kind of put high level kind of concepts, but maybe we can drive towards what that hub potentially looks like as we move through. So maybe next slides, whoever's managing the slides. Thank you. So how do we realize this vision? I think we're going to put ourselves enterprises. So I'm the little man in the corner over there in blue jeans. So how does enterprises as the entity solely owned by the town going to facilitate this? I think from our point of view, we view enterprises as basically creating sustainable growth and profitability. So ultimately, we have to look at it as an entity, as ROIs. How do we create dividends for the town that we bring in that helps you use that money for other initiatives as well that go beyond just the commercial entities? But at the same time, we want to be able to drive certain economic activities in Innisfil through strategic initiatives. We want to potentially maybe take on specific responsibilities and aspirations as an organization on behalf of the town to facilitate things. And I think that's part of exploring what that is. So while we are armed with the mandate to bring in revenue and bring in basically an ROI for the town, the other part is also how can we use this vehicle to further grow and basically lead specific initiatives in the town. And I think the idea is, how do we go from inception right now in 2001 to kind of building a team and working through an execution strategy over the next 3 years, right, to 2023, and then delivering on that from 2024 all the way until 2030. So how do we do that? And I think that's the key part. I think part of the first discussion today is about this inception point. So how do we create that kind of vision that we want to really drive towards? And what does that really mean for us? Next slide. setting the right path. I think this is maybe we're going to get into the kind of the meat and potato of things here. Am I correct? Everybody has had to look at the slides, correct? So this is not new to everybody. Okay, just to make sure. Okay, that's perfect. Thank you. So setting the right path. So maybe the next slide for everybody here. So to kind of coin the term, I think by the CFO of the town, Mike, he mentioned that we want to, the word smart city gets thrown around a lot. I think what we need to look at is maybe an insightful city. So I'm giving Mike credit because I think it's his term and he kind of coined this phrase. So kudos to Mark to come into this kind of building on the whole Innisfil kind of working, but also insightful city. How do we build an insightful city? How do we develop a city in a town that really services and has the, I would say, the citizen at the heart of it? And as communities are growing and as services are diversing and technologies permeating every aspect of our lives, how does the city itself and the town and the community really builds the right narrative around that? And I think from just experiences that having done this globally, where a lot of communities fail and fall flat on their faces, they jump towards putting infrastructure in place, but there hasn't been a lot of thought about what services, what's the governance structure around these. So what we really want to do is build the right structures in place to facilitate this. And I think the whole point of Innterprises is and this is the strategic initiative component, how do we go about facilitating that? And I think the first idea is, at first and foremost, is just building a governance structure. Who are the different actors in the community? What are the different decision-making processes between them? How do you govern the relationship? How do you govern the different shares of controls, addressing problems, setting priorities, and ultimately creating accountability before doing anything? So a lot of those have to be set in place. And I think not to the decision to speak about this, but I think it's level setting on the fact of how important that actually is. Just that layer that kind of allows us all to collaborate together around some of these initiatives. But the second part is where I think that we should be a focus here is what kind of services we want to offer. So what is it that we want to offer across multiple vectors, from mobility to utilities to government to healthcare to education to buildings? What are the different services we want to offer? And how do we see those services materializing to the benefit of the citizens in the town? Once we've defined the governance structure and the services, the remaining items become a lot easier, because based upon that, we can start defining the data standards that we actually have, who owns it, what's the framework for managing data. And from the experience I was seeing with Sidewalk Labs in Toronto, that's a very critical part. And I think that became the last point to discuss. They didn't focus on the strategy. They were too busy building infrastructure and not focusing on how and what services are going to drive people and what's the data governance mechanisms they're going to have in place. And we want to be aware of the realities of these challenges, but also put the best foot forward when it's associated with this. And how do we go about building that? The other part is also what are the analytics and capabilities and software and hardware is going to enable these services that we want to see. And that's it. That's where we're going to get into the play of engaging with different partners and different vendors and various factors, seeing which aspects we as a town and community want to actually build out, which aspects we want somebody else to build out for us over time. But ultimately also, what are the infrastructure we're going to invest in? So what is the infrastructure that we're going to build now or even facilitate this growth in the future? That is going to enable this. Is going to be a backbone for the community, but at the same time facilitates easy interoperability, which is basically simple plug and play, ability for us to allow different applications and different versions to really interact more actively together. And I think that's really important, because the failure from other communities who've really undertaken such growth is that has not been something that they've looked at. There was a big chase to kind of put infrastructure in place and no thought about how it's going to work together, because nobody really thought about what the applications are, what the standards are and the services, what the frameworks and governances, and what services ultimately they're trying to service the customer. And to give a good example, sometimes the highest tech is not necessarily always the best solution. I always remember the example of when the Americans and the Russians went to space and they tried to use a pen, it didn't work. The Americans spent millions of dollars building a space suitable pen, a pen that can write in space because ink can't flow down. The Russians use a pencil. So we don't want to be the people who build a space pen if a pencil is available sometimes. So sometimes, and I always like this example because it's really illustrative. It's about what you're trying to achieve, which is writing. That's a service we want to offer. What's the best, easiest mechanism to do it? Instead of building something so complex and so costly, while something else that's there might seem simple or rudimentary, might service our citizens a lot better. So I think that's kind of the mindset we want to bring forward to facilitate this and to enable this kind of insightful city. I think gets to what are the themes and the areas we want to go in. So maybe the next slide. And sorry, maybe pause here before I get into the next slide. Apologies, sorry. Is there any questions on anything we kind of said, I've said so far? It's kind of a lot. So it's kind of a very meaty slide. I don't want to skip over it.
No, I think we're good, Hashan.
Oh, no, I think I do see a hand.
Sorry, I'm sorry, I did see a hand. Carolyn, Councillor Payne.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just have, I'm looking at the slides. You've got the furthest date away is 2024, and you've got the buildings and the plans in there. And when I look at these buildings and I see 16 floors of apartments, is this before the hub, or is this going to be after the hub? Because that's only 3 years away.
Sorry, that wasn't actually about the hub, Councillor. That's actually more kind of illustrative of enterprises as an organization. So the idea is it's illustrative. The number of heights it's just there from a symbolic reason. The idea is to, and we move to the previous slides just to kind of capture that. If whoever's moving the slides, sorry. Yep. I think the rendering takes a bit of time. Yes. So if you're referring to this slide, this is not about the hub. This is about enterprises, the organization itself. So it's more symbolic that we're building the organization, starting at 2021 with myself only. That's it. How do you slowly build that? If you look at moving forward from inception, how do you build that organization, the people, the capabilities, and the buildings are more representative of having an organization that's fully functioning. So the more we grow, so it's not representative of the hub. So I apologize if that's what misleading, but that was more representative of the organization.
Okay, I'm unfortunately I'm a picture person, so when I see this, it kind of it startled me a little bit. So I get where you're coming from. Thank you.
Yeah, it was more symbolic. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Sadi.
Thank you. I wonder if you could just elaborate a little bit on your comment about being too busy building infrastructure with no follow-up. I think when you were saying that, I started looking through the slide and I may have missed the meat, but it's just a statement that really hit me, and I want to make sure I understand that. So
just from experiences I've seen before in communities that are growing and are aspirational, is that there's always a jump to build infrastructure. So you'll get a lot of companies like, and I'll be careful here just to kind of mentioning names, like the big global companies will come knock on doors and say, hey, put this technology in or put that technology or build that infrastructure. And people are very quick to do that without really taking a step back and asking fundamentally, why? Why are we doing this? What's the ultimate kind of service we want to offer our citizens? And I think that's the impression I'm trying to give here is before jumping into just putting technology and tech in, I think the question we need to ask is ultimately, what's the relationship between the various entities in town, the governance structure? How are we going to all work together and resolve and come up with priorities and decide on things? The second question is, what are we trying to serve? Who are we trying to serve? What are we trying to give them? And I think that's a key part. Once you figure that out, the rest kind of is easy. It becomes tactical discussions. How do we achieve this? How do we put that forward? I think that's a key part. A lot of times people jump into the sexy technology because it's easy and it's nice and it captures a lot of headlines, but it's not that part. I think it's better. It takes a lot longer for us to set that kind of vision and strategy and objective of what we want to do and the services we want to offer our citizens before we start putting the infrastructure that kind of facilitates that. And a good example is I've seen an entire community in the north in upstate New York. They did an entire fiber ring. And the question you asked them why? Well, it's new technology. Okay, but that was it. there was nothing else. So that all that money was sunk into that, and the community wasn't that well off. So why was that done? And that was that. And you see that even in larger cities, like you go to Dubai and others, they're just very, especially putting infrastructure in. But what is that infrastructure supposed to serve? I think for the lessons, taking that kind of global experience and saying, look, I think the best way to object is to talk about what services we want to offer. Simply, what do we, and also what is our vision? Our vision could be as simple as we want to be a carbon neutral community by 2030. That's our vision. We want to make sure every household is energy efficient. That's a vision. So once we kind of set that, we want to make our community X and we can set what the strategy is. Once we've kind of defined what that is with our citizens at the heart of the discussion, then everything else then we can start saying, okay, well, how do we achieve this vision? And a lot of times that's never asked. It's jumping into the technology. So I hope that answers the question, Councillor.
It does, and I think it's easy to sometimes with the excitement jump in, but you're right. We need to look at the end result and our goal and work backwards from there, and it makes it, better decision. Thank you.
No, I appreciate it. And I think that's kind of the vision I want to set for Innterprises, how we as an organization.
I think you muted
Sorry,
yourself.
I think I lost me for a
Yeah.
second. I think you lost me for a second. Sorry. So, what's the vision that, again, before we build the infrastructure, what is the business strategy we're going to take is going to enable this as well? Because it's not only just making ROI, which we will make. That's the easier part. The difficult part is what are the strategic initiatives we want to take on board, and the town wants us to take on board to facilitate that vision at the end. I think this is part of the discussion today. Any other questions? Okay, so I'll take the silence as maybe we can move on to. I don't want to take up too much time unnecessarily. So maybe we can move on to the next slide. So I think now it gets into what we want to kind of get the council's feedback on is from a thematic point of view. Where do we want to take the town? Usually, when you look at growth in any community, there's kind of certain pillars that you see it, be it in energy or smart energy, economy, in mobility, in healthcare, or some people can call it wellness as well to make it more encompassing. Governance and environment. So those are some of the themes that exist, and you can see there's growth in it. And I think the question I want to put forward to the council is are those the right themes, first and foremost? And I think once we've defined are those the right themes, then what exactly in those themes we want to achieve? So in each of those themes once we've kind of narrowed them down, what is kind of our end smart goal? And if we move on to quickly to the next slide, so we can kind of elaborate on it before we go back to this slide. Like I think from our SMART goal, we want to define, once we've agreed on the themes, a SMART goal, which is basically something specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And that's extremely important. So we can actually, again, be able to build our capabilities to facilitate the achievement of this goal at the end. So that's kind of what we want to work towards. So maybe we move to the previous slide quickly. And thanks, I don't know who's running the slides, but thank you very much. I actually have no idea. But thank you so much. So I think the question to the council, I think this part of the session now is a lot more of you talking and me listening. Are those the right themes? And this is not clear. And I think that's a kind of floor to use. Is this comprehensive of all the themes you want to cover? Do you want to take some of them out, or we add some more, or divide them, or even clarify them?
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Worship. Hashan, I'm glad to see the smart healthcare. I went to a meeting in convention in Ottawa a few years ago, and we talked about an aging population. And I think that's something we as living north of the GTA have to consider, that aging population will want to get out of the hub of the GTA eventually. I'm glad to see that in there for a future. And I know that with the county and with Mayor Dolan, we invest a lot of money into healthcare in Simcoe County. So I'm glad to see that. That's something I haven't seen before in a design for strategic themes. So I'm pleased to see that. So thank you.
No, thank you. Appreciate it.
Anyone else? Councillor Osani?
So when we are looking at strategic themes, and there's 2, 4, 6 of them, are you asking whether we agree with all 6 of those or whether we're prioritizing? Because, I also remember your statement about financial growth, profitability, and is the vision achievable? So if we're trying to do too much, is it achievable?
I think that's a discussion today. Is are those the right themes? The first and foremost, are they the comprehensive kind of view of what we want to do? And then the second question is it too much? Do we want to axe them or even prioritize them and say we actually want to put this one first and then this second and third? I think that's a question for the council. I don't want to kind of dictate. I just want to give you the floor. And I go also, I've written the call. You know the town better than I do. I come in from an outsider's point of view. Eventually, I'll be part of the fabric to such a degree that I know the town very well as you. But I think, as I currently stand right now, I think that the question is to the councillors and your worship mayor and everybody on the call is is these the right things? That's the key part. And if it's too much, should we take some of them out or combine some of them together?
Councillor Van Berkel?
I wonder if smart communication should be in that lineup
Okay.
as well. You know, I think we need that.
I'm concurring with Councillor Van Berkel, smart communication. I think we all saw something this week, was it Tuesday, when Rogers went down and how many people were impacted. I think we need to, is this going to be the new norm? We don't know with the telecommunications company because they are consolidating so much. And with that consolidation of communications internationally, what happens when we crash like we did on Tuesday? You know, how do we have something set up that we can still communicate with our residents if there be a disaster or be something going on that the communications network people can't handle? They're not doing their job right now. I mean, what happened with Rogers was unbelievable. So we need to see if there's a way we can improve on what is being offered to us in our design of our future, I don't know where you want to put it, smart communication.
No, it's a fair statement, and also because it falls into the idea like even if they're doing a great job, it's a single point of failure. That's an important thing to kind of recognize also, and that might make them susceptible to cybersecurity attacks. That brings the whole network down. And that was a suspicion, I think, for some people in the initial stages. So I think we need to be conscientious of that. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Councillor Waters?
Thank you, Your Worship. If we're going to talk about communications, we could also talk about transportation in terms of EVs and that kind of stuff. So a lot of these things are interconnected. So I'm just wondering when that, because you have energy, economy, a lot of an environment, a lot of those things are interconnected with one another. So to separate them out is really quite difficult. And I think the key there is that the fact that they are interconnected, that that you can accomplish many different things by if you're going to go after smart energy, then that can also influence economy, and it can influence transportation, all those types of things. So these things are all interconnected, and so to take one of them out, I think would be a mistake. I think if your goal is to be smart, or is to basically have all these as I guess subheadings around the idea of what opportunities are available, and they all work together.
And on that point, Councillor Waters, thank you. I think smart mobility was kind of a category to capture transportation. So it's kind of to look at mobility just beyond just transportation. It's every aspect of mobility that kind of you can think about.
True.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I do agree. It does. Everything's interconnected. We just have to kind of accept that. It's one system.
Mr. Kane?
Thanks, Your Worship. Not to take away from this conversation, but when council, just offering a suggestion that may help council brainstorm some ideas for the purposes of workshop is, think back to the community strategic plan and and the vision and objectives that this council's worked hard to set in there. And you can almost think of this as a way of ways that we can deliver on those broader community initiatives. So I think when council's looking at these strategic themes tonight, just in case you haven't already, is keep in mind those elements and those themes that will help us best deliver those ambitious goals and very warranted goals that are already sitting in the community strategic plan. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. King. So I had a question about governance. So smart governance, does that include like customer service, things like apps to report a pothole and how it gets fixed, and or a garbage can that's overflowing, or is that included in governance, that kind of customer service response?
So that's one component of it for sure, absolutely. So the kind of applications that are under the purview of services that the town offers, okay, that's correct. The kind of wider definition is just any framework of interaction, be it that you're alerting them, for example, about, hey, if we take our current situation right now, the protocols around COVID, availability of vaccines in specific locations, emergency protocols. God forbid if there's an emergency that actually does happen in the community. So even the democratic engagement of the town, but the fact that you're already demonstrating part of it being smart right now. You're using YouTube and Zoom as technologies to kind of further engage with your community. So it's that whole narrative around the I would say council or city relationship from a government point of view with the citizens and everything that governs that, basically. From issuing out permits to reviewing planning requirements to everything that comes and everything along that route for sure. And the benefit is we can define it however we see fit. It's our terms, so we own them, we define them. I'm just taking notes as we're going along, so I don't forget anything. Any points on your end, like just kind of to help the council along, is there anything missing? We mentioned communication here and many times, is there anything missing? Or anything should be taken out about it as well?
Anything missing, council? One thing that come to mind, but I don't know whether it fits in here or not, and it's a big theme since COVID and probably post-COVID is equity or inclusion.
Okay.
Earlier on, Deputy Mayor Davidson was talking about age-friendly communities and aging in place. And at the same time, I think it's important to create spaces that are for all ages. So, child friendly as well, and first family friendly. I just don't know if I see that more as a planning tool and less as an innovation or enterprises tool. I just don't know if it fits here.
I think it's a theme that you can maybe, when we come to define our SMART goals, maybe that could be there, like an equitable economy, for example, having an economy that's equitable. So we can work the themes into a measurable parameter. But I do agree with you. But I think it's a measurable parameter on how we want to make sure that actually happens. Thank you, Your Worship. I'll make a note of that.
Thank you, Councillor Ices. I saw your hand.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I was going to maybe add to that and say that if we're talking about themes for all of Innisfil, how do we socially make each resident kind of equal, kind of like you were saying? How are we being smart socially with the different needs that our residents have? And so I'm not sure where that would fit in any of the categories that we're talking about.
So maybe can you expand upon that? Maybe unpack that a bit more for me. Maybe an example would help if that's possible.
Well, I guess as we talk about these things, I automatically think about us developing the orbit, and I'm not sure that that's what we're talking about. And so we have, a diverse town, but we also have a diverse population where everybody has different needs. And we see that a lot socially with us dealing with the pandemic, right? How can we connect ourselves in a way that builds our community? And it doesn't necessarily mean that we're, moving around smart or that we have a smart economy. It's just what makes Innisfil a community. And that's what we often struggle with, as even our wards are quite a bit different in the small towns that we have in them, from Big Bay Point to Cookstown to Lefroy. What makes us residents of Innisfil?
I think No, I think that makes sense. I think the idea for you is like, while our diversity is one of our strengths, it does present a challenge. I think that's what you're kind of alluding to. So how do we make sure that the services coming forward, unites us, but also makes sure that we don't, that it services the needs as per the diversity there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, that's what I'm thinking about when I think about that. And so I'm not sure how you phrase that in your themes, but it's one that I think is missing, the social fabric of our town.
So maybe that could be something that we can put in some of our, when we actually define the themes, maybe put it in there. Like one of the things we can actually say, example of governance here is equality. An example, again, I'm not saying asking this as an example, equity of access of services, irrespective of social or economic backgrounds. That could be yours. Or for example, a level, making sure that all services are equal across the board, irrespective of which part of Innisfil it is. And we see that in Canada, the federal government endeavors to try to make sure that healthcare, as an example, is equally across all provinces. That's kind of the intent behind some of the responsibilities of the federal government. So I'm not saying we're the federal government here, but I think the same, maybe you're alluding to the same idea, is that how do we ensure as a diverse community that we make sure everything is equitable from a service point of view and the benefits point of view across for everybody else. So nobody's losing the opportunity. And that comes with different strategies that can come even through our smart mobility theme that will make sure that mobility is accessible to everybody in town within a specific time frame to reach any point of the town. That can allow different parts of the community to engage better and kind of breaks the barriers between the community at the same time. I hope that kind of gives a bit of a view of where I think that kind of potentially fits.
Councillor Fowler and then Councillor Sadi.
Thank you, Your Worship. So just as I'm listening to the conversation, I'm hearing the same things being brought up, but there's something you mentioned earlier, Hisham, that I want to clarify. With these themes, you're saying that the way we're looking to achieve them can stretch across three different categories. So for example, when we're talking about inclusivity, we can talk about governance, include healthcare for mental health care, and mobility. So I mean, like, they can interconnect once
Correct.
we break it down into more specific items, correct?
That's correct. And it's all of the vision that we want to achieve. I think that's the key part. When we kind of put the vision, less about the mechanism of how we achieve it, but what we want to achieve. I think that's up to us. If you want to say, for example, we want to make sure that healthcare, for example, I was speaking to, I think RVH, I think is the name of the hospital that was eventually expanding the town. I think that one of the topics that one of the young ladies is speaking to there, she doesn't want to think about healthcare. She wants to think about well-being. So for her, even the YMCA is part of that kind of fabric. Mental health services, services in terms of quality of air. So for her, she's expanding the definition of healthcare. I think the same thing can happen to us. So we can expand the definition to what we see fit for the community that we're serving. So I agree with you, Councillor.
Thank you. So in essence, we're creating a web that supports itself, by crossing various categories here.
Absolutely, 100%. Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sadi.
Thank you. I guess for me, when I'm looking at these strategic themes and the 6 titles, and we seem to, different council members are asking, well, where is this and what's missing? For me, I need more of a definition of each one of these. So I know, oh, that's in that category. Yeah. And, the inclusivity is in our governance and all the rest of it, because we're asking, well, does that come in this? Does it come in that? Or are we building these as we go along? Because I can't say what's missing without getting a little capture of each one. And that's just the way I work.
So I think, Council, just on that front, I can provide a definition. There are some definitions around this, but I think it's in a more appropriate that we define it. What do we mean by our own smart energy? It might mean one thing for Toronto and mean something different for us. And I don't want to box the council into my thinking or somebody else's thinking or somebody else's ambitions. I think it's really for us. And I think when we come to define the themes in terms of what our target is, it's going to come in there. Like, I'll give an example. Smart energy can mean for us that we want to make sure that all our energy is renewable, as an example. Or we want to make sure that all our energy, we generate all our energy and we're off grid. So we're self-sustained from an energy point of view. That could be a target of ours as a community. or we want to make sure that energy costs are below a specific point for everybody in town. There's different ways we can, I would say, define this or skin a cat. In this, I think it's really up to us to define what it is. It's high level themes. I think that's the idea. It's kind of ways of kind of boxing things, and we can define it how we see fit. So, and again, like I said, it could be a matrix that some of these things like equity will flow through all of them. Equity in terms of services, in terms of the energy, the quality of energy, accessibility to mobility, accessibility to healthcare. So all those things are themes as well. So maybe what we could do as a way to kind of move forward is if we kind of saw smart communication as one of them that kind of came out that was not there. And we can start, if we move on to the next slide, start defining. So maybe take each theme independently and start defining what it actually is, using that kind of smart matrix that we talked about, like something specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So if we go to maybe the next slide quickly here, it still mentions some of this as a high level. It's with the citizen kind of in mind. And somebody taking, I apologize, who's the minute taker on for the meeting?
Someone in the clerk services is taking minutes, and this is all being recorded, so
Oh, perfect. Okay.
You'll be able to play it back afterwards and listen to anything over again. So be too concerned about having to capture everything for work.
Thank you, appreciate it. And thank you for the staff for supporting and facilitating. This has been a great help. So if you take an example of just energy, let's start with the first one, energy. And maybe we can start here. It's what was the definition? Like, what do we want to accomplish? What is our goal and why is that our goal? Look at just smart energy. Is our goal to be carbon neutral? Is that our goal? Is our goal to generate our own energy? Is it about costs? So what, from a council point of view, what is that kind of goal? And this is kind of an open floor. I think this is really for the council and everyone on the call to kind of speak up.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Worship. We speak about carbon energy, a reality that's hit, I've seen it recently very quickly, and it's been a topic of discussion with our fuel tax that's just been increased with a carbon tax. I don't know about you, but I think there's better ways of doing it. There was an article I was reading this morning how the shipping industry is one of the biggest impacts on the carbon industry. I think carbon cause is 2%, is just done by shipping alone of all our carbon that enters our atmosphere. Our governments seem to be handling it inappropriately and putting it on like our gas to get around. The cost of food is impacted. The cost of moving goods is impacted. And I think it's the wrong way to go. It's great to be carbon neutral or to have a goal, but when our taxpayers or ratepayers, there's only one taxpayer internationally, can't afford to buy food, I think we've got a problem. We're doing it the wrong way. We're looking for a quick grab for money, and I think we've got to be very careful when we're going carbon neutral. And as we say carbon neutral, we do have a subdivision that was built several years ago. I think it's called Lionsgate. Sleeping Lion. Those homes were built in a way that they were supposed to have solar panels. The roofs were designed in such a way that they would be solar accessible to simply put on. And it wasn't really accepted. It never really was done, but the homes were built that way. So when we talk about carbon neutral, we have to really look at the cost to the taxpayer in the process. We can put all kinds of rules and regulations in place as a municipality, but at the same time, what is the cost? When the younger generation can't afford to buy a home, a townhouse is $600,000. I think we have to be very careful on using that theme word, carbon neutral. I think it's a little bit, I think it's becoming a cliche that I'm not impressed with. That's all. Thank you.
And I appreciate it. I was just giving it as an example. It's not necessarily that we might have to adapt just as a concept. Some other towns have done this, like Perry Sound. I've kind of made that a target for themselves. So I'm just giving it as an example, not necessarily saying that we should be taking that as our motive. But thank you for that.
Councillor Waters?
I guess taking off the deputy mayor's point is that we keep on talking cost to consumers when we're talking about a carbon tax, but nowhere do we talk about the costs of not doing anything. So the fact that many homeowners are not going to have insurance on their homes because they've been flooded out one too many times, those costs aren't are always pushed off to the side. So there's a whole series of costs that we're currently paying because of pollution, because we're wasting energy and all the rest of it. And those costs are not included. And we're paying for those already, and they're getting higher and higher. So I got the point of, that these are types of mechanisms that actually do work. They've been proven all around the world that do work. And being carbon neutral is to be quite honest, I don't like the term either, because the strategies to get there usually are based on adding more renewables as opposed to conservation. And so my point would be is that we should be, if we're going to be talking about what is our goal around smart energy, is that first of all we should always say that we should try to conserve as much energy as possible before we ever start implementing programs around renewable technologies. I spent my entire career talking about energy efficiency renewables, and renewables are sexy, but the real savings are on the conservation side. And so if we're going to go with smart energy, we should be looking at ways to reduce energy in people's homes, new homes and old homes, the transportation vehicles we run. So I just wanted to bring up those 2 points as one that around the costs that we don't talk about and that we're already paying the price on those. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Anyone else on defining the theme of smart energy? Councillor Van Berkel.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think also on Alex's points and the deputy mayors, where car manufacturers are talking about going electric, all electric, I don't know, by 2030 or whatever, that we should be ready for that as well. I mean, we've talked many times about putting in stations where they can charge their cars and that, but because of cost, we have kind of put it on the back burners too, or put one here and there. And I think we should really look at that we start doing more of that and start budgeting for that type of thing so that we are ready for it, when it becomes a reality.
Okay, so Councillor, you cut off for about 4 seconds. So sorry, can you just repeat the last part or the penultimate part, please? You don't mind.
What I said is that we should start budgeting for things such as that for when electric cars become a reality, that that we're ready for them and not have to hustle to get it done once they're here.
So basically, I think your point is to make sure that we're financially resilient around this, but also from a system point of view, resilience, if I understand the point correctly.
Exactly. I mean, so because I think gas stations in the future, and I don't think too long in the future, are going to be a thing of the past for a lot of cars, that they're going to be, we've got hybrids now and we're going to full electric. So we should be ready for that.
No, absolutely. I agree. Thank you. Thank you for that. So I think the themes coming out of this is a focus on costs. If I take that, the cost of energy is an important component, and resiliency is another one as well, and being proactive in engagement. So I think those are some of the themes I'm kind of capturing.
Shaman, if I could add to that too, that sustainability. So the cost should not fall. Like, we've always worked on the basis that growth pays for growth. So it shouldn't be borne by the existing taxpayers to pay for the new people that are coming. So the building code or the standards that we apply to new builds should include energy efficient homes, and EV chargers in garages should be something that's standard in a new home build.
No, I agree. Yeah.
Councillor Van Berkel?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I think that's standard now. That, I mean, most new homes that are being built have chargers in their houses. But if somebody comes from Toronto or from Hamilton or whatever, and stays for the night, they need to charge their cars too, and that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So the public infrastructure, basically, not purely just looking at private infrastructure. I agree with you. So if we take the kind of categories here, it's resiliency, being proactive and sustainable, but also building a sustainable enabling technology infrastructure. So for TIC and power, I'm not sure if Danny is on the call, but basically ensuring that Empower has the infrastructure in place to facilitate and accommodate for that. at a cost-effective means, basically. So planning ahead.
Exactly.
Councillor Waters?
Thank you. Just in terms of the second point, in terms of measuring progress, is that understanding where we are now so that we can know that we've been successful. So analytics is a huge part of all of these various themes that we've been talking about, is having a database that says, okay, this is where we are now. This is how much energy we use per square foot. This is how many renewables we have. This is how many green buildings we have. All that kind of stuff is important to know so that we can say 5 years down the road, we've hit our target, we've been successful. So I think that's a huge point of success, is knowing what the baseline is and then measuring against that baseline in terms of where we go in the future.
No, perfect. Okay. Thank you for that. So yeah, making sure that we actually, I think that gets to the point here on the letter M, which is measurable. How do you measure progress? How do you ensure you've achieved this goal? It's not an end goal. Like, there's a journey there that gets you there. So what is it? So maybe if we kind of think about, if I kind of take the theme here, I think the goal from the council is to basically make sure that we're able to enable the capability, kind of the growth in energy, kind of new energy. Don't look at it that way, whatever that term kind of means, and the usability of EVs or others in a sustainable way, basically in a cost-effective way across the town. Would that be a goal that seems to be resonating with everybody based on the discussion right so far?
I'm not seeing any no's.
So I'll take that as a, hopefully maybe just the S. So in terms of, I kind of just to kind of, well, because I know I want to make sure we have enough time for the other themes as well. Is the objective here, just to kind of take away, kind of step back, to ensure that this kind of level of infrastructure is available across the town, or is there a level of diversity that we want to take into account as we're looking at building some of these things?
Councillor Fowler?
I believe during our previous planning sessions, we had areas we designated for growth according to the province. Remember, we looked at diversifying the growth plan to maintain as much green space as we possibly could with a balanced approach. Would that not then dictate roughly where we would put more effort into making it? If we're directing population growth in a specific area, would we not offer it make it an incentive in that specific region? For example, we're looking a little north and south of Peninsula Beach Road. In that area, we'd be more inclined to put it that way, so that people are less, they're desiring less to move out to the more rural areas, so we can actually nudge them in the right direction.
No, I appreciate it. No, I do agree. There's more localized infrastructure, basically. So keeping basically close to home, keeping the infrastructure close to home. Recognizing, of course, we're dealing with a grid. So we have to kind of work within the parameters of the physics as well.
No, what I was, sorry.
Go ahead, Councillor.
What I was saying was that, like, we are looking to, when we talked about the growth, instead of the sprawl that we're trying to avoid by condensing growth, when we go to condense up the per capita, like in the space per capita, that in that regard, we're looking at giving more incentive. So we have the grid that goes across all of Innisfil, but we're looking to put the items that would entice home buyers to purchase in the growth area that we've got designated, as opposed to creating a whole new infrastructure and tapping into the grid there.
No, I get your point. Okay, so yeah, so making sure that the infrastructure is basically where we've designated the growth to make it more attractive. Is that okay? Yeah.
Councillor Van Berkel.
Just to elaborate on that a little bit, because like what's going to happen like 20 years from now with, like, for instance, InPower, when 15,000 cars in Innisfil are on hydro and they're all charging at the same time. I mean, it's something we got to look at as well, the infrastructure and the grid, because now sometimes in the summertime when everybody turns their air conditioner on, we have a problem. So it's it's a lot more, there's a lot more involved than just making sure that we have car chargers or whatever, if we're going to go to a carbon-free footprint. So.
No, I agree. I think and Danny, as I was on the call, I think Danny and the team are doing a fantastic job of trying to look at future planning and accommodating for a lot of those things. And I think it takes their goal is to make sure that the cost of service remains appropriate while we're trying to achieve those goals at the same time and facilitating all of that and facilitating that growth. And we're not going to be the only jurisdiction that's facing that challenge. These other jurisdictions are gonna. It's a big uptake for everybody involved. I think just for somebody who's worked in the sector for 15 years, it's bigger than most people, I think, sometimes wrap their head around, even from a policy point of view. And you see the federal government put out a lot of money for, hey, put in EV infrastructure, but there's no money given to the utilities who have to facilitate it, which doesn't seem to be an appropriate approach. How, like, you're giving everybody bottles of water, but like building the taps, that doesn't make any sense. But thank you, Councillor.
And I would add to that, when Councillor Fowler was talking about directing it to certain areas of the town, again, on the equity theme, if, yes, require those new builds to be built, with certain energy efficiencies, while at the same time, having incentives for older homes to be more energy efficient at the same time. And I think part of the smart part of it is making sure you leverage all levels of government. So in our case, Simcoe County and the province and the federal government, because everybody's kind of saying the same words, but maybe not pedaling the bike in the same direction. So in order to make sure that we totally take advantage of anything that becomes available to us, because certainly in this budget we saw the other day, there was a theme around retrofitting homes to make them more energy efficient.
Absolutely, yeah, sure. Okay, so the idea is also making sure that nobody's left behind. So even though while we are pushing for the new builds to be in this space, we need to make sure that nobody in the town who has already been here for a long time and built the retirement home or built a home that their kids grew up in, is that it's not felt left behind, whether through infrastructure incentives. And our job is to make sure that they are basically brought along through the journey, if I captured that correctly. Okay.
Yeah, like just making sure that there's some sort of incentive for that, poor old couple that's built their house in the 50s and they're still on electric baseboard heaters, that kind of, with leaky windows. Councillor Waters?
Thank you, Your Worship. I was going to mention off a point that Councillor Van Berkel had mentioned, was the idea is how are we going to accommodate this new growth in EVs in terms of electrical chargers throughout the town? And the first reaction of most utilities is, well, we'll just build more power plants, which is very, very costly and requires a lot of time. But there are a lot of energy efficiency technologies out there that could easily be implemented to help keep your overall power consumption the same, while at the same time allowing that growth in EVs. So if we allowed for the new air conditioning systems, like most people now will buy what's called a SEER 13 or SEER 15 air conditioner, when meanwhile there's SEER 21 air conditioners out there. So that the idea of these technologies are there now, but there's not a huge uptake in them because usually they cost a little bit more money. But if we want to accommodate the future EV power that they're going to require, is that these types of technologies, whether it's high efficiency air conditioning systems, heat pump, hot water tanks, air source heat pumps, all those technologies are there now and can easily accommodate that EV growth if we adopt that type of technology. So sometimes these things happen simultaneously. Another point I wanted to mention is I just received an email today from a group that looks after bringing on environmental and energy auditors. And apparently the federal government in the new budget has allotted a whole bunch of money for an opportunity to grow this business. And these are people who go into people's homes and they give them advice in terms of how they can save energy. So there's going to be money coming down the pipe in the next little while to allow Innisfil to help those people that you were just talking about, those people living in the 1950s home, 1970s home, where if we can facilitate having these auditors going in finding how much energy, how they use energy, and recommend different ways to save that energy will be quite helpful. So that's just coming down the pipe. So I think this is really an opportune time to have this discussion, because this is what's happening with the result of the new budget just coming down.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, sir.
Shem, I'm just going to go to you quickly with a time check here, because it's 7:08 and we've done one theme.
Yeah, and so I wanted to. I was going to say the same things, Your Worship. You kind of read my mind. So maybe let's move on to the next one in terms of smart economy, which is maybe a big kind of aspect. Maybe let's start with that one. From a smart economy point of view, what kind of smart economy we want to attract or define within the boundaries or beyond of Innisfil for ourselves? I know it's kind of a tall order, but I think it's an interesting one to kind of discuss.
Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Your Worship. In this particular scenario, I've had a lot of discussions with other councillors and our Chief Financial Officer regarding this. I like the idea of creating an identity of it for Innisfil, where we have the idea that new innovation technology can come to explore. It's a safe place for companies to express their ideas or thoughts or something they want to enhance in communities. And for example, we have the snow plows and the street lamps, which are miniature hubs, I believe, if I understand correctly. And it still works within budget. It gets the loyalty to the town that if a business, we gave them their first step up and their chance that if something blossoms, they will feed back into the community with their loyal, if we give them a hand up and then, or an opportunity or a platform, and just say it takes off, they're going to be like, well, I remember Innisfil, so let's set up shop in Innisfil. Let's create jobs in Innisfil. Let's create economy in Innisfil that it cycles back into itself, as opposed to the 84% that leave town to work for other industries.
So, Councillor, kind of maybe scratch this, kind of build upon what you would kind of say, or maybe expand the definition here. So your idea is basically for us to be kind of this hub for all this innovation to kind of come in and, I would say, basically trial out the technology, develop, mature, and make Innisfil its home. So really, I kind of focus around the startup space and the more kind of innovative space. Is that kind of the viewpoint that you're presenting? If I understood it correctly?
It's one aspect of it. Yes, the idea being that if people understand that Innisfil is a place where, hey, I have an idea, I can bring it here, and it doesn't come out of the taxpayer base, right? We're inviting industry, we're inviting the creativity into town, not on the backs of the taxpayer, but on the backs of the companies that seek to establish themselves, right? So it takes stress. One of the things that we have here with the town is that our economy is so heavily based on the taxpayer dollar that it causes concern. So if we can get businesses to come in, and I believe our CFO, Mr. Millicent, and I were discussing this, where in Welland, for example, they had the one major player come in, and once they established themselves, the support businesses surrounded them, and it grew exponentially. And it came from one good decision from a company. Now, if we can do that with Innisfil, if we knock down the, for example, the commuter rate, even by 20 or 30%, that's people driving from their home in Innisfil to their job in Innisfil and spending money in between in Innisfil. It creates an economy that's fed by the taxpayer itself, but also the business, which supports it. Everything supports itself or grows.
So, no, I see the point. By building that, by attracting a leader in a sector, element of a sector, eventually build basically the supply chain, the ecosystem, and by virtue of living and basically working here, the money is all being spent. So it's a circular economy concept, basically.
Yes.
Okay.
And our Ryerson DMZ hub too is part of that, our accelerator hub. Van Berkel.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think, this goes back to something we've been working on for many years in order to, get our economy going, that we need to expand our infrastructure. It's we've talked about this for a lot of years, and, we've been, I think over the years that I was on council, we talked about coming from Barrie or whatever, and we're always been afraid we want to do it ourselves. I think, we have to start thinking like we always, or like we've been doing the last 4 or 5 years, out of the box and find a way to expand that infrastructure so that we can bring in business, so we can bring in factories and do whatever. And I think that will, do a lot for our economy. And, this conversation has gone around, I don't know how many times, how are we going to do this? But I think that's one of the major factors.
So maybe, Councillor, if you don't mind, just for my sake, because I'm not aware of all the discussions previously, which infrastructure specifically you're kind of speaking about here?
I'm talking about sewer and water expanded to our industrial area, 400, whatever. I think it's probably more important than a lot of things, because that's where the action is going to be. That's where we're going to employ people. And like I said, I've been on council off and on for the last 20 some odd years, and it's been a conversation in every session on council that I've been on, and it's still not here. So, we have to start. I think our previous CIO used to say to us, think outside the box. And that's what we're going to have to do. We have to do that to bring this infrastructure to where we want it. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities and a lot of ways to do it. We just have to put our heads together and, come up with a solution.
Deputy Mayor.
No, thank you. Thank you, Councillor.
In concurrence with Councillor Van Berkel and Councillor Fowler, one of the things, infrastructure is the key part. I did speak to our CFO about it, whether I don't have any problems sharing with our neighbors to get the infrastructure into our industrial area as quick as possible. The reason for that, to get it there quicker, whichever way, and as least expensive as possible for the ratepayers, is that I'm afraid, and I was reading an article recently, that we're basically, and I've seen it before, we've had proposals before council where, we want to build a warehouse in Innisfil. Well, warehouses don't create jobs. Warehouses, there's just a lot of empty space. This Mississauga's having some big issues. Scarborough's having some issues now where 40 years ago, they built these massive warehouses. And unfortunately, the land is so valuable, they're now moving those warehouses somewhere else. And of course, they're going to look north. And I really have a fear that if we don't get going on our servicing to the 400 corridor, the industrial area, 6th line, these warehouse places will be looking at Innisfil to locate these warehouses. And they just don't generate jobs. They really don't add to the infrastructure because they don't use it. It's just a storage space. So I think we have to really be careful what we're attracting and be selective of what we're attracting and say, fine, if you're going to build a 25,000, 250,000 square foot warehouse, there has to be so many jobs provided. And just a point, I was driving down the 400 2 days ago, and just north of Canada's Wonderland on 7 on the east side, there's this massive warehouse being built, and it looks so out of character. It was farmland. And I thought, I'm wondering what's going there. And I'm going, what a waste of land if it's just more storage for refrigeration, which I see a lot along the 400. So I have concerns that let's get the infrastructure going, as Bill Van Berkel has said. 26 years we've been hearing about it, and we're still not even getting there. And I think our focus needs to be into that corridor for economics to create jobs and work, live, and play in Innisfil. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Melanishin.
Good morning. Good evening. Thank you very much for that. I hear the sentiment. There's a lot of discussion about infrastructure and moving forward with water, wastewater servicing, and those are the discussions we're having right now as we speak. We are moving forward, looking towards Innisfil Heights, servicing of that area. As we move forward, we have master servicing plans are underway to meet DC bylaw renewals in the next couple of years. So although those are underways, I would love to shift the focus to, let's not worry too much about the infrastructure right now, but really focus on the direction that the types of businesses that we want to entertain in bringing into that area. And that's what I think Hisham's focused on, and getting your direction, strategic direction, to get a good understanding and perspective of how council, what direction council and the type of businesses that council wants to entertain. And so I suggest, perhaps putting the infrastructure on the sides. We are working on that behind the scenes, and focus on sort of the smart initiatives that Hisham is trying to the themes that he's working through.
Thank you, Mr. Melanishin. Councillor Waters and Councillor Sadi.
Thank you, Worship. Just on that point, the biggest project and most innovative project that's going to be happening in Innisfil over the next 10, 15 years is going to be the orbit. And there lies a whole bunch of opportunities around us in terms of the types of industries, types of products, types of services that we want to have in the orbit to make it successful, to make it sustainable in terms of what the vision is all about, is attracting these industries to Innisfil so that, you know, the orbit is going to be, like I said, it's going to be 10, 15, 20 years in the making. So companies be interested in feeding that type of development, but also become very good at it and become very, very well known at it, that, you know, that other municipalities take up the charge on building similar things that we're doing at the orbit. So my thing is we should be investing, and I'm sure Mr. Kane is already doing this, is that seeing what industries would be willing to move to Innisfil based on the fact that they're going to have this opportunity to not only demonstrate their technologies and services, but also be within minutes of the development. So I think taking a serious look at what's going to be happening at the orbit, that whole movement towards sustainability, and kind of looking at all the feeder industries that we could attract in Innisfil at Highway 400, they're the type of industries we want to have. Like Deputy Mayor says, we do not want to have warehouses. They don't attract, you know, they're not intelligent businesses, they're not long-term businesses, and they don't have a lot of manpower behind them. So I think we want to get smart businesses, innovative businesses moving to Innisfil. And I think the type of things we're going to get at the orbit are the types of industries we should be trying to attract.
So maybe, Council, there's been some discussion. Thank you for the feedback. Just, and I think as Mike mentioned, can we maybe elaborate on what kind of industries we're looking at? So maybe if we kind of break them down into kind of sectors, is it more like what DMZ is doing with kind of focusing on the GovTech, so government technology? Or are we looking at agricultural technology? Are we looking at distribution centers? Like, I know that I'm giving an example of what you said, you know, the warehouse, but as an example, is there a specific sector or type, or maybe type of jobs we're kind of looking at, or enterprises we're kind of looking at? Because that kind of helps frame the discussion with smart economy. What are we trying to drive to? Because if we're going to build infrastructure to enable a sector, we need to know what sector it is so we can build that infrastructure per se.
I would just say one example would be not modular homes, but prefab homes. So as opposed to building all these houses on site, you can build a much better house in a prefabricated warehouse. So something like that would be closely related to what's going on in the orbit. You know, mass timber facilities, those types of industries which would support the orbit. So they're the kind of ones I'm thinking of. They could be some renewable energy technologies, water efficiency technology build companies. So there would be types of things that we could attract to our industry.
Thank you, Councillor. Appreciate it.
Councillor Sadi.
Yeah, I may be, you know, prior to this last question, but, you know, for me, it's all about innovation, because that's what we've tried to attract here. And that's where we're going. It's the innovation, the ideas that have saved, you know, when we look at smart economy, it's our community. Using the Uber has saved us in transit costs that other municipalities and cities have used. And we need to look at more partnerships with that. The libraries are now, instead of looking at areas that they can't service and what can they do more economically, putting in electronic lockers that provide a service to our community, but save us in operating dollars. I believe it was Councillor Van Berkel, or I can't remember who, about the new pilot testing the sidewalk snow clearing devices, and that all of that will save us in operating dollars and benefit our community. So I think we need to look at more industries and support that will support our community. Innovative ones, technology is really the way to go. The new speed radar cameras that are mobile will be moving our community, that save having police officers at every corner where people are complaining about speeding. they benefit our community, and it's all technology. We need to have more of that, as well as on the crosswalks and all of that, and the buses. So it's all technology, and that's where we need to invite and encourage.
So, Council, can maybe kind of elaborate on this? Having come from like the sector that kind of does innovations, I was part of a startup that went from when I joined, it was 12 people to 90 plus right now, and advising a couple other ones. So, one of the key questions maybe to ask is the idea that for us to kind of facilitate. I think what a lot of these sectors are kind of looking for is either a suitable environment to trial out their technology. I think that's one aspect. The other part is also the enabling technology to facilitate that. So are we, is the council articulating this, what we're kind of putting forward here is, do we want to be that space for trialing that new technology? And that comes with pros and cons. Right? We have to be kind of conscientious of those things, with a lot of growing things, like as well, like when you get new technology. But at the same time, that means that we have to make certain investments to kind of bring about the infrastructure that they need to see. A good example I've seen in Hungary, I believe, they basically, to attract electric vehicle manufacturers to the space, what they did is they basically built a racetrack, a massive, large racetrack for infrastructure so they can test out. And there's a lot of other things that they built within that racetrack, but the idea is to kind of attract that kind of sector. They went and built that infrastructure. So is the council kind of saying that we need to kind of build that infrastructure as well? And I know the basic infrastructure like sewage, water, electricity is kind of imperative. Like I think goes without saying. But is it more about like designating areas and zones for specific? Is that where we want to push towards, or that's not where? Or am I misreading the what's going to be articulated so far?
Deputy Mayor and
Thank you. Hisham, you've really hit on some areas with technology. I was reading an article. Of course, I'm involved with plastics and waste. It's always been kind of my thing with what's going on. There's a company called Husky that's doing some major breakthrough on basically a solution to plastics for the future, a complete solution. It's companies that we need to look to attract that. We know the environment is a huge issue. That's why we have a carbon tax. If we could attract companies such as Husky International, other companies are out there that have a solution for waste. Waste is our biggest thing. The GTA is going to continue to grow. Ontario is going to grow. That's the federal government's plan with immigration. And if so, that's going to happen. We need to, if the environment's going to be our issue in the next 20 years to leave a better planet for the next generation, if we could attract those kind of companies that are innovative, think outside the box, that are solution oriented towards helping the environment, because with that, you're attracting a very high level education of personnel who can afford the homes that we're selling at $1 million a pop in Innisfil. If we looked at those kind of companies, that solution companies for waste, recycling companies for waste, and using the newest, latest technology, I think we could create a new type of employment for this new hub that we're kind of creating north of the GTA. Instead of manufacturing is dead. It's going to be years before it comes back to Canada because we do it all in India or China or somewhere where the labor is cheap and there's no environmental solution. So maybe this is an area we can look at as environmental organizations, technology with environment to make a better planet. Just my point of view from a perspective.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I appreciate that. No, I agree. Okay. Well, thank you for that.
Thank you, Your Worship. I agree a lot with what the Deputy Mayor says, but I also think that we should diversify a little bit. You know, not everybody is a genius and not everybody can work in a computer factory. So I think, if high paying jobs come along where, they make hubcaps and, there's a lot of employment, we should look at that as well, rather than, one certain industry. I think we should look at everything that comes in, and other than warehousing, I agree 100%. We don't need warehousing, but if a car manufacturer or somebody is looking for a place, I think we should, try and get that, because there's a lot of people, they're not, they can't sit there and figure out drawings or do whatever. but they're very good at doing something with their hands. So if a machinery manufacturer that builds hi-hos or bulldozers comes in, I mean, those are high-paid jobs, and I think we should look at that type of thing too, so that, you know, there's a variety for everybody.
Thank you, Councillor. And
Thank you, Councillor.
to be clear on the warehouse thing, we should probably distinguish between warehouses and distribution centers, because I don't think any one of us would say no to an Amazon if they
Right.
into our community.
Yeah.
But getting away from that for a moment, and this is maybe a little bit too boring, but one of the really good things about the pandemic is before the pandemic, 82% of people who were going to work left our municipality. And I don't know what that statistic is going to be post-pandemic, but I know it is going to be a lot lower. And with those people working from homes comes support for local businesses at home. So if I'm working in Toronto, I'm going to the dry cleaner in Toronto, I'm dropping my kids in Toronto, I'm getting my hair cut in Toronto, I'm doing all those things. But if I'm working from home, now I'm purchasing all that from my local neighborhood. And so I think, you know, I think it will. And I think there's also been a real kind of, and I hope it lasts post-pandemic, is this whole shop local and support mom and pop as opposed to big box. So I think there is an opportunity for that kind of, you know, small entrepreneurship, and that would help all parts of Innisfil.
Thank you, Mary. No, I think I do agree. I think we need to kind of be conscientious of the new work kind of environment that's going to kind of arise for the next couple of years. With everybody going to be working from home for the last, I think, year plus now. So I greatly appreciate it. So if I kind of caption, summarize some of the notes here, the idea is to kind of build the infrastructure, smart economy, to build the right infrastructure, the smart infrastructure, that the underpinning infrastructure to facilitate, again, just economic growth, irrespective of what that growth, that economic might be, and not distinguish. At the same time, try to attract the right level of investment from an innovation point of view. So being that hub, not only for companies to start, but to trial out their technology and grow with us, to be that kind of area of growth. So building the infrastructure to facilitate them coming, but at the same time allowing them to grow. But not forgetting about, like as Councillor Roberto mentioned, basically, not forgetting the fact that we need to not all look just purely about just the smartest and latest things. There's still bread and butter, meat and potato industries that are still part of the bedrock of Canada. And we want to maintain and ensure that they're a part and parcel of our community and of our infrastructure. Did I capture maybe that the thoughts are on this theme correctly? So maybe, sorry.
I saw Councillor Waters' hand. I don't know if you want to make the last comment on this.
Just very quickly, when you were talking about infrastructure last week, we had Shelley Wright talk about some of the health issues she had with Wi-Fi, and one of the things she was mentioning was the whole idea about putting fiber in the town, and I think that kind of goes along well with what our CFO was talking about, is the idea of putting more fiber in the ground in terms of telecommunications, high-speed internet, all those types of things. So we might be able to, I hate to use the term kill two birds with one stone here, but the idea of improving health of residents through minimizing Wi-Fi, at the same time putting more fiber in the ground that improves our appeal to industry, because fiber is much faster than Wi-Fi. So I just want to mention that infrastructure opportunity for Innisfil.
Thank you, Councillor. It is noted and appreciated. Okay, so maybe moving on to smart mobility, which is kind of an encompassing kind of theme. So maybe for the council, what is smart mobility? And again, I think that the town has done a great job just with the Uber initiative itself as an example of that. So I think we're ahead of a lot. I think we have a lot to offer. So in that view, what is kind of the end goal? If you look at 10 years from now, from a smart mobility point of view for the town, what would that look like? Or what's our objective in trying to achieve it?
I'll start with active transportation is a big part of it. Like, don't build another road without a bike trail and a walking trail. And
It's active. I'm sorry?
I was just seeing anyone else. I don't see any
Oh,
other.
sorry.
Councillor Waters?
To go along with our Uber innovation is working with those large companies who are interested in autonomous vehicles in terms of, as opposed to having drivers, having vehicles which roam around Innisfil, picking people up, dropping people off, taking them to the orbit, all those types of things. So it might be an opportunity for an economic vaccine here in terms of helping us there, but it goes along with our philosophy around Uber. Is that what spins off of that is autonomous vehicles. So something around that might be helpful.
Thank you. And just a note on mobility, it's just not limited just purely just to vehicles. As Her Worship Mayor mentioned, like the roads, active roads, there's even just the road infrastructure itself. And I know that, for example, Lake Simcoe is suffering a lot from a lot of the runoff from the salt that's basically being done. So even just having better road infrastructure, more intelligent road infrastructure, it makes mobility better and improves even just the kind of side effects of us having to manage this infrastructure in place. Like you'll see, for example, roads that basically have solar panels built into them, as an example, so that you can use that road surface. That's not allowing that this is what we want to do, but that's an example of infrastructure in that space. Smart traffic. So you see this quite a lot in Europe, in which they don't build 4-lane highways, they build 3-lane highways. So during rush hour, the middle lane is dedicated to going north, while at the end of the day, it's dedicated to going south. So that way they save on building more asphalt and by just better traffic management. That's an example that basically they were able to reduce the cost of infrastructure that they build and use what they have more intelligently, because they've noticed is that a lot of times just that additional lane is not used in the opposite direction of traffic. So why build it? You build a middle lane that you can alternate its direction depending on the usage of traffic. So that's just an example. Or even using the shoulders to allow people to use the shoulder basically to alleviate some congestion when necessary, by allowing that part of the road to be open for people to use at certain times. So just examples just for kind of to stir some of the discussion.
Councillor Van Berkel?
Yeah, I was going to go there, Your Worship, like more paved shoulders for try and make the town more bike friendly. I mean, we have a certain amount now, but we can sure use a lot more, like a larger infrastructure of bike paths, and so people will use them, and I think that will help a whole lot. And not only that, that would be a lot safer than what we have now, where they have to drive on the roads with their bikes.
Anyone else on mobility? Councillor Sani?
I think too, with a large senior population and more, disability as well, there's more the mobile bikes, electric bikes that people are using, some 3-wheelers. You see more on the road. That's increasing. I think it's only going to increase as people have more difficulty with their health or their age or licenses or even affordability of a car. So if you're in a small area and you need to get to a grocery store and you don't have a car, this may be your only method of mobility in the town, as well as bikes. And the increasing popularity of the rental bike services, and even seeing in some cities where now instead of courier services in cars and vehicles, they've gone to almost these little rickshaw type things. So with technology changing, I think we need to be aware of that, be prepared and be smart when we're doing our long range planning. What's it going to look like? Because technology is changing all the time, and people are now, as you had mentioned, Your Worship, more people working from home, and they said they're not going to go back to the city. So what's that look like? We're just getting out. So that's going to affect our mobility.
So, Councillor, if I understand your suggestion correctly, like the idea is, let's say as an example, for electrifying the infrastructure for electric cars, not to recognize that there's multiple types of electrical vehicles. It's not limited just to the individual cars. It might be smaller cars, electric rickshaws, you mentioned, or even electric bikes, as an example. There's a great program I saw in Portland Oregon, that basically they have people with electric scooters. Kids love it, but it's a great form of mobility, basically. And you don't even have, you just park it in any location, take a picture, and they'll come and collect it or send it to somebody else. So basically we'll find it and use it. So no, I agree with that. Yeah.
And the one thing that has been impacted for seniors and in retirement centers, if they have electric scooter, they can't bring it in a building and there's no charging for their batteries, or they have to bring their batteries in. So it's a changing climate where they want to bring their electric scooter with them and they need some way to recharge those. But the buildings, the infrastructure doesn't have that. So I think it's something that we have to think about as well.
So, Councilor, can I ask a question? Is that a prevailing problem? Just to kind of know, is that a prevailing problem that you're seeing, or is it just unique to one or two locations?
It's an increasing problem in seniors' homes and retirement homes because they can't bring them inside. So they need them. They can't walk far, but they want to get out. So they have to sell them. They can't bring them in their rooms, but it's a changing climate for seniors. And I think it's something that needs to be considered. The same as we look at charging stations for automobiles, what will there be for those with scooter needs?
Absolutely. So maybe, Council, I know maybe the only time I'll probably maybe deviate away from the task here is that there is a fund from the government of Canada, NRCan, that's around electric vehicles. This is the first time I ever heard anybody speak about it from that point of view. So it might be worthwhile for us to actually explore going after that funding. And as a business, because they don't pay everything 50%. So maybe we can, if there's something we can offline myself and you, anybody else interested, to kind of talk about that a bit more, because I can see an opportunity from a business point of view, but also from a way of servicing the community. So maybe we can take that as an example, as a trial site. Again, this is just me spitballing, so I don't want to promise something that we can't deliver. But we can try that, see that maybe that there's a need there. Let's facilitate a small site for testing that out, because it could be a wonderful opportunity to help senior citizens in our community. And I think they paved the roads that we're basically walking on right now. It's only the right for us to treat them with dignity and respect. And this is one way we can do so.
Yeah. Anyone else on mobility? Do you have enough, Hisham? Do you want to move on to health?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So let's move to healthcare. I think, yeah, thank you so much, Rebecca. So healthcare. So smart healthcare, maybe smart well-being. What does that mean to us in terms of the services we kind of provide and infrastructure? Whether it means telehealth, as an example, a more integrated approach to well-being, from mental health to physical well-being to support in schools to the actual hospitals themselves. So what do we really mean by smart health in our community?
Councillor Fowler?
Thank you, Your Worship. One theme that we've had since COVID started that the library has taken up rather well is diversity and inclusivity. Now, mental health being something that needs to be addressed, as well as physical, because ultimately having a person in good physical shape but having mental instability or concerns kind of throws the whole system off on its ear. So if we can find a way like to piggyback off what the libraries use as the base, because we have a growing population that's getting more diverse as it grows every year. We have a stronger youth population. We need to get them out off the technology and maybe interacting once COVID passes, obviously, and finding a way to get them to either gain skill sets so they have strengths and the coping mechanisms to either stay in town should they find employment or go elsewhere. So, I mean, beyond the physical with the RVH satellite hospital that we're discussing, I think it's good to have a good support network. And if we have, like I said before, a growing population of more and more diverse cultures, we need to help them integrate into the town where they feel comfortable and welcome as well.
Thank you, Councillor.
I'm not seeing any other hands.
And so maybe just to kind of help everything see a view on what potentially smart health can be. So one of the things we've seen As an example, in the UK, one of the projects I worked on is when they were rolling out smart meters for the homes, they're asking what are other business cases that can be built for it. And the immediate one was telehealth, the ability basically to monitor. So allowing more and more people to live at home while receiving healthcare. So can you actually allow for infrastructure to facilitate the monitoring of their devices? So there's an ease of connection through their Wi-Fi basically, or Ethernet, if that's possible, to their devices at home, and that links into the infrastructure you're building for smart meters, as an example. So that's an example of something. Another piece that we're looking at, Mike, kind of with the technology of bringing along with the smart street lighting, an easy application to that is a better ability to, God forbid, if an accident happened, to alert the police and the ambulance service to an accident actually happening a lot faster than people actually calling, and giving them actual real-time data right there and then of what's actually happening, the conditions of the people and everything. So those are just small examples of some of the things that we can kind of consider and think about. Maybe as we're looking at just smart health and smart well-being overall.
Thank you. One of the things that County of Simcoe is doing right now, and I know that the province wants to expand it, is paramedicine. It's where when paramedics on their downtimes, when things are slow, are proactively going out to visit, frequent users of the service and prevent them from calling when maybe things are busier, and preventing trips to the hospital just by going and doing home visits with residents who frequently call.
Any other points again on smart healthcare? I don't want to belabor a point if we don't feel that there's anything there. So.
Yes, thank you. I was just thinking of many of the seniors for many services don't have smartphones, don't have iPads, and they've had to rely on services set up with different resources to assist them if they needed to get an Uber or a taxi or medical drivers. My husband's an electrician. He's seen an increase in seniors in their homes putting in generators because they don't want to rely on loss of power to meet their, their health needs in a home for oxygen and the rest when they lose power. So, and they're sort of afraid of that. There seems to be this great surge on them in the last year or two. So I think with, it's a fear for people as well, and it gives them a comfort level. So more and more people can't get a physician. They're relying on telemed. So they need technology in their home. So I mean, technology is, and having access to that is key to their health, whether it's mental health, their physical health, and those resources.
So I think, Councillor, you kind of alluded to is the need to have infrastructure that enables people to access healthcare a lot more remotely, or that they need to have them to get into a hospital, things of that sort. And I agree. So as the hospital is coming into place in the town, that's something that I think they need to consider as well, is that how do they tie into the community and offer services beyond just the boundary of their limited geography, which is just a health center. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Councillor. Yeah, and to that point, I've seen countries in which that became a big concern is how do you deal with an aging population in a community if they lose power. And for example, they have equipment they have health equipment that requires power, a dialysis machine, for example, or oxygen machine, for example. So what do you do with those people? They enter into a vulnerable category, and how do you service them? So I agree with you that that's a very important view you need to keep in play when we're offering these services. Thank you, Council. So if there isn't anything on healthcare and there's another question, we can move on. I know we have 15 minutes left, and I know. Thank you so much again for the time. And it's 2 hours is a lot to ask everybody in an evening. So on smart governance, so maybe, I think maybe a lot more closer to home for the council. So as I mentioned, it's about services in the town, but also even just interaction and just the idea of civic engagement from a city's point of view or a town's point of view with its wider population. How do we see that? I know we did.
You're looking at it, Hisham. You're looking at it.
Like, for example, I know this sounds like, but what's it called? I know this seems like electronic voting, email voting, things of that sort. So I know that's very in the future. And there's some advocates for it against it, but I'm not taking a position on this. But that's an example of things of that sort. Polling people, for example, things of that sort. Is there a view on some of those things from the council?
I like the ability of people to reach you with issues that they're having. I use, for example, something our police services is looking into now. It's an app called What 3 Words, and it's an app that has mapped out the entire world surface in 3 meter by 3 meter squares. And every 3 meter by 3 meter square has 3 words that identify exactly where on the globe it is. So it's being used to help find people that are lost in the woods, but it's also being used as a 311 service for municipalities. Like, you take a picture of some litter that's dumped on the side of the road, and upload it with that app, and it identifies exactly where it is, because we use civic addresses, but not every place has a civic address. If there's a boat floating out in Lake Simcoe somewhere, and the motor runs out, they can use that. And as it drifts, it'll switch which 3 meter square it's in. So I think it's a really...
No, I heard about that technology. It's absolutely fantastic. Yeah, it helps, especially in a lot of countries that don't have addresses, like in which the concept of postal codes don't exist, as an example. For sure. Anything else in terms of like even civic engagement, or even just like you mentioned, services we offer to town, or even capturing a good, I'll give you an example of something that this sounds a bit remote, but in some of the let's go into energy, but kind of relates to a certain degree. So some of the utilities used to use TV programs as a way of indicating of when energy power is going to go up and down. So there's a popular show in the UK called EastEnders, and I used to work in the control room there, and they would literally be watching the show, and as soon as the show ends, they start ramping up power because everybody puts on the kettle to drink tea. So what ends up happening is they recognize that those social indicators are no longer there. So what they're trying to do is see if they can monitor things like Twitter and others to start looking at social parameters and indicators to be able to understand energy usage. So similar to any kind of community engagement or council engagement or governance, is there other means and mechanisms for gauging and understanding of the viewpoints of the citizens? That's another thing that I think smart governance can actually support and help. Like I mentioned, there's all the other stuff that comes with actually the services, just improving the type of services we offer. Is there a viewpoint on that one at all?
Anyone? Councilor Van Berkel?
I think, Your Worship, like, I hear what you're saying, but we've got a pretty good system in Get Involved Innisfil, like something goes on or something is happening, we can find it out pretty quick if you get onto that, and to get involved Innisfil, everything is on there that we need to know, and a lot of people use that. So I mean, maybe expand on something like that. I don't know.
Thank you. Councillor Waters?
I was just going to suggest that any way that we can better engage our residents, I'm for. In terms of either promoting what we're doing, getting feedback from them, I think is a great idea. But something that I know that we've talked about on council, and I think it was Councillor Sadi brought up a little while ago, in terms of how do we contact individuals on a more regular basis. We always hear from a few people who give us their opinion, but a majority of people don't participate in our democracy. So how do we, is there a technology or a way that we can interact with our residents and without them being fearful that we've now got their email address and we're going to dump all sorts of stuff on them? Is there any way of having some sort of aggregated database that allows that type of feedback without maybe identifying the individual, so that they feel that, that they're not being watched and all that kind of stuff? So I don't know how that works, but it would be interesting a way to see how we can better engage our residents by using that type of technology.
I do recall CAO Jason Rayner talking about a polling system where you can input your demographics, your population, everything about your community, and it gives you an output that is generated based on what you put in there. It's not real, but it's based on. I have to find out a little bit more about it, but it's kind of like an artificial intelligence poll based on the input that you put in.
Yeah, there's different ways, like for example, just engaging. I've seen different councils that basically get involved in the idea that when people kind of engage with you through the different services they offer, engaging them with different surveys and questions online as part of the application. Hey, can you actually give us your feedback on this kind of policy? So it's different. I think it comes down to how engaged your citizenship is in governance. And I think just it takes some time to build that kind of civic mentality of civic duty, sometimes to get that feedback. Like I've seen it before in universities in which moving voting to electronic voting really had a spike in the number of people participating. Now, again, that presents challenges, of course, around security and ensuring that there's no tampering with voting, and not everybody has access to it. So it just presents a number of challenges. But those are some of the thoughts just to kind of consider.
We've been fairly successful. The last 3 elections we've done internet or phone voting. So
interesting. Okay.
Yeah, we've been fairly successful that way.
I wasn't aware of that. So it's actually quite. I applaud you for doing that because I think it's very helpful. It really eliminates as many barriers as possible, unlike some other jurisdictions that kind of add barriers to voting. So maybe because we have like 5 minutes of smart environment, not to make the environment the last thing on our plate, but maybe we can conclude with it on smart environment. I know it's kind of a very open topic, but in terms of how do we view environmental monitoring, environmental protection, even engagement with the environment? I'll give you an example. Most people don't know where the best locations are to go do something from a environmental point of view. The best location to go fishing, the best location for camping, things of that sort. So how do you view smart environment, whether it's monitoring and managing the environment or even just enjoyment components of the environment?
I think we have to bring up agriculture, and we probably should have brought that up under economy and not environment, but I think it fits in both. Local food is really important to Innisfillians.
Is there a desire to grow that kind of side of like doing smart agriculture, like with the improvements in censorship and better watering techniques and monitoring of soil? And things of that sort. Is that something that's of interest?
Councillor Ices, and then I'll go to Deputy Mayor Davidson.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. I think we can't, we really do need to think about our environment and how agriculture fits in with the changes that we're thinking about within Innisfil. The way agriculture runs in Innisfil isn't really sustainable in an urban setting. We talk about local. I'm not aware that the town has a local food policy. I'm not aware that the town has a plan for soil in the new orbit or in the land around the orbit, which would be a great spot to have local food. So there's lots of thoughts that need to be had about how agriculture fits in an Innisfil where we have this vision for the urban, the suburban, and the rural all to fit together. So I think it is a great topic. We could spend a lot of time on it, but those would be my thoughts. We do definitely need to do some more thinking about how the environment and agriculture fits in with our themes.
Councillor, is your concern that agriculture will be eroded as part of like kind of the ecosystem in Innisfil, or is it more about the like I'm just trying to unpack what's your thoughts?
I guess what I'm saying is there's a reason why most places are either rural or urban or suburban and not all together. If you just have urban, you have that, or if you just have rural, then you have that space where the type of farming might occur that involves, I'll just say, bigger equipment, and it's more of a commodity.
Mm-hmm.
If we're looking for local food, then we can fit that into smaller spaces, and we do see some of that. I know of some pretty good examples in Innisfil where that model has been used to market to local people. In Canada, where the agricultural sector is more focused on, exports, and you think of the wide open spaces of the prairies, and that's kind of the vision of agriculture as a country. But if we're thinking about a vision for that in Innisfil, then that could be quite different, and that's what I'm talking about when I talk about changes in agriculture.
Thank you.
And busy roads don't make a good mix.
No, exactly.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Worship. In concurrence with Councillor Ices, I know that he's posted some articles that I've read on our soil. Our soil is the key to growing anything. Unfortunately, recently I've been reading and following up on vertical gardening, and it can be done in very small spaces. It's being done by a lot of larger cities in Europe at the moment. It's very inexpensive. Actually, it's not as expensive as we think to get going. And if we're looking at the orbit, we talk about community and we talk about being self-sustainable. If we looked at the possibility of even having vertical gardening taking place on rooftops or in open spaces where the community can get involved and learn from it, it's very, very productive. And currently I'm working with another project that we're looking at doing vertical gardening quite extensively. And I understand recently one corporation has put forward almost $30 million to look at this for the future of providing food for your community. So it basically keeps our productivity running year round, and it supplies the community. And it's something we could look at in our bylaw process, our planning process of vertical gardening versus spread out agricultural gardening. And we know we're losing that agricultural land very quickly. And it's also not land that's as healthy as we'd like it to be to grow properly. So we're using chemicals to enhance it. And I know that years ago, the Bradford Marsh, the chemical use was unbelievable. And a lot of the information was deep sixed because it was so contagious, some of the chemicals being used. So I think with what we're looking at here of agricultural, we look at, again, new technology that's out there, it's being promoted, and maybe we could be a step ahead of everybody else in that direction. We've got the place for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Worship. As well, to add to Councillor Ices and Deputy Mayor Davidson's points, in my ward, for example, there's a lot of farmland that is being purchased and land banked. Companies are purchasing the land and they're not doing anything with it. It's just sitting there with the hopes that one day it can be turned into residential or people use it for retirement incomes, so to speak. So if we had to find a way to either incentivize people to do something with it that's more advantageous to the agricultural industry, or stop the companies from purchasing it just to let it sit. Thank you.
Councillor Orsatti.
Thank you. I'm going to agree with our deputy mayor with the vertical gardening, especially with the orbit, when I was talking about greener infrastructure, allowing the balconies had gardens on them or trees and that, because I think it's essential, especially as people are locked in apartments, locked in condos. Pandemics will probably continue with in the future different types, and we need to have that access to that. And I think it's something that, as we're, that was one of the things I most admired about looking at the orbit as well, was that sort of small farming, food to table connection. People want to be connected to the farmers. They want to buy local. And I think we need to find a way to incorporate that as a smart way of retaining some farmland and having the appreciation and keeping our farmers in the area.
Thank you. We're just a few minutes over time, and we probably should move on to the last one, but we can't leave smart environment without talking about our lake. So it's without Lake Simcoe, Innisfil wouldn't be Innisfil. So we need to keep our lake as clean as possible. Councillor Waters.
Just one last note too is I was going to mention that, and thank you for bringing that up. But just in terms of when earlier I talked about having a baseline in terms of where we're at and when that we've made some improvements. There's all sorts of great organizations in Innisfil who like to keep track and monitor and advocate for the environment. And it would be nice to be able to have a one-stop shop for everything environment in terms of, how much green space do we have? What's the quality of the lake? So there's Lake Simcoe. Lake Simcoe Conservation Authority, they have a lot of great data on the lake. And then there's a lot of land management, there's agriculture going on. So it would be nice to be able to basically go to one spot that says, okay, are we getting any better? What's happening to agriculture? Is it disappearing? Green space around, the amount of forests, those types of things. What's the urban footprint happening? What's happening? So it would be nice to be able to have that one-stop shop where we can go and find all this type of information.
Thank you. So we're over time, but if we could hang another just a few minutes to cover the last the smart communication.
Yes, please. Yes, that'll be the last one. I think it was a topic that we were kind of very interested in, so I want to make sure that we capture it before we kind of close out. And thank you for your patience as well.
I think this one is really important for who we are in Innisfil, because we are so geographically spaced out. And as Councillor Icey said earlier about our social fabric and what makes us Innisfil, and I think a connection is a smart connection is what we need. We do have a new tool that we've just started implementing, which allows messages to go to text messages to go to phones, and it can be as widespread as talking about an event that's going to happen next week, or it could be that there's going to be some trees trimmed on this road, or it could be these two houses are going to have a planned outage for hydro. So it's this targeted or as wide as you want, and I think that's really going to be helpful. And in the future, I'd love to see drone technology too, and connect people via drone technology. I know that there's some places now where defibrillators are being delivered by drones.
Any other points? I think a couple of councils brought up a notion on communication. So is there a specific viewpoint and where you think your communication needs to go?
Councillor Van Berkel, you were the one that thought this was important. Did you have some thoughts?
My thought is on the communications. First of all, to be able to communicate instantly when there is a disaster of some sort. Like, for instance, when we had the sewer backups there, it took too long for us to get in contact with the people. I think we could have probably prevented a lot of heartaches. When there is an emergency in town of any kind, whether it's a large fire or whatever, or something on Lake Simcoe, a drowning, so that we can, communicate instantly and effectively, as well as, to keep all our residents in the entire town, informed of what's going on. If we think it's important, they should know about it. That type of communication. And I think, to me, that's very important. I think that's important to a lot of residents, because how often do we hear, well, we didn't know, nobody told us, and we need to change that, I think.
We do have that new app now. It's just that the trouble is just getting
Yes.
people to sign up to it and spreading the word.
I know, and I've been doing that because, and even noticed that a lot of counselors haven't done it, but it is a great tool, that app. I mean, if you sign into that, I think that's a very effective way of communicating, because it'll tell you what's going on almost instantly.
And for your benefit, Hisham, this app was developed by one of the winners of the
Hackathon? Yeah. I heard a lot about it. I think Tim speaks very highly of it, and does Mike as well. So yeah, it was a great initiative for sure.
Anyone else on communication? Councillor Isons.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. Just maybe to reiterate that service should, like, every resident should have reliable internet service, and that's not maybe new news, but it's definitely a challenge to get internet service to every part of Innisfil. When we see this now, when students have to learn on the internet and we have to conduct business on the internet, if it's kind of like the air and water to our economy and to our lives now. So for that to be accessible and available to everyone, no matter where they live.
Thank you. Councillor Van Berkel.
Just another note, I think, Your Worship, what's important is that we are the instigators of the communications, that we make sure people get it. It's like voting, 40% of the people vote, the rest don't care. They only call you when you need somebody or when they need something. It's always been that way and always will be that way. So it's important that we go to them instead of waiting for them to come to us through communication, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a problem with that. We have to get them to change those MFIPA laws, because we aren't allowed to contact them unless they give us permission. So that's a bit of a snag. Any other? Hisham, do you have what you need, or is there more? Would you like to do a wrap up? Are you having some difficulty getting?
Yeah, hello, can you hear me still?
Yeah, we can hear
Yes,
you.
I lost communication for a second. I apologize for that.
So I just wanted to say, have you got enough from us? Is there more you need?
No, absolutely. No, thank you so much. This has been very enlightening, and I appreciate you guys giving me the time today. We'll summarize some of these notes and come back for additional kind of comments from the council on next steps from our end. But thank you so much for this. I really appreciate it. Thank you for the time today. It's been very insightful and very helpful from our end. And on behalf of the team and everybody on the call, thank you so much. And if you have any other points, by all means, feel free to drop me an email or at any point, and just, you have my email contact at the end of the presentation. So feel free to call me or message me at any time. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And who's advancing the slides? Is that Ms. Creamer? Or the clerk? It's the clerk.
It's not me. I believe it's our assistant clerk, Kevin Jacob.
Oh, Kevin. So Kevin, say hello to Hisham. He wanted to thank the person who was.
No, thank you, Kevin. Appreciate it. It's really grateful. I don't know. I wasn't sure who was doing it, but thank you so much. And thank you, Lee, as well, for helping, and thanks for everybody for supporting this and being on the call. I know it's a lot to ask really to be on the call until 8 o'clock at night. I greatly appreciate it.
Wait till you get to some of our council meetings, Hisham. They go a lot later than that. But it's nice to get, like, it's very difficult. One of the worst parts about the pandemic is not getting to meet people when they join the town, and it's hard to get to know somebody virtually. But I think tonight all of council has got to know you a bit better, and I hope that you've got to know us a bit better, and we really appreciate your time and spending all this time with us. And I have to say personally, I so appreciate your enthusiasm. It's great to see somebody come in here with so many ideas and so much energy. So thank you for that.
No, thank you as well. No, thank you so much for being so accommodating and for your leadership and for the council's leadership and all of this. We're all in this as one team, and I'm looking forward to really ensuring that Innisfil becomes a beacon not only in Canada but globally.
Thank you for that.
Well, thank you.
We'll ask for a recommendation then to that the Innterprises strategic planning session be received as information. Moved by Councillor Fowler, second by Deputy Mayor Davidson. All those in favor? That is carried. And next is the confirming bylaw. And could we have a mover and a seconder for that, please? Councillor Van Berkel and Councillor Arsati. All those in favor? That is carried. And finally, our adjournment, and that is moved by Councillor Nicol and seconded by Councillor Fowler. All those in favor? Thank you, everybody. Thank you. I know this was your week off, so I appreciate you being here, and we'll see you all next Wednesday at our regular council meeting. And those of you who have joined us on live stream, thank you for your attention tonight. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.